Looking around, it's clear the War Within expansion got a pretty good reception. Sure, the initial hype has cooled down, and more critiques are rolling in, but that's just the usual cycle. That honeymoon period at the start of any expansion never lasts forever. But even so, the general vibe about this expansion is still positive overall. But you've seen the title and the thumbnail, so you already know this isn't going to be one of those positive videos. So, what am I actually going to talk about here? Well, let me first tell you that I'm not here to say The War Within is a bad expansion. Honestly, it does a lot right. The art style, the zones, the music, the questing, the warbands and delves, there's a lot to appreciate, and I'm sure these features will only get better with future updates. Credit where credit's due, the devs really did deliver on a lot of fronts. But this isn't clickbait. I genuinely believe World of Warcraft today is made mainly for its existing fans, and only for them. That's not necessarily a bad thing. The devs can make whatever game they want for whatever audience they choose. But I think these thoughts will resonate with more people than the current player base. Because honestly, I'm pretty sure the number of former players who left because they feel the game isn't for them anymore far outnumbers the current players. Then you add in the people who've never played, but might have if the game offered something different and the perspective changes even more. Think about it. World of Warcraft, the biggest name in MMOs for 2 decades, made by the industry's biggest company, gets a fresh expansion in 2024, at a time when the hunger for a great MMO experience is through the roof. The expansion itself received positive reviews from critics, creators and players, yet somehow WoW is still miles from the powerhouse it once was. Why is that? The conditions are literally perfect, huge success ahead, right? Sure, WoW it's likely still the biggest MMO, but the gap between it and the runner-up is a lot narrower now compared to what it used to be. And on top of everything I've already mentioned, keep in mind that WoW would be in a worse shape now if it weren't for Classic keeping things afloat through those dark days from the end of BFA all the way through Shadowlands. Even today, Classic Era and Cataclysm help boost retail's player count simply because they share a subscription. So when you consider all the perfect conditions, the help from Classic and the sheer power of Blizzard, it makes the current state of retail WoW feel pretty odd. Something's definitely up. The game isn't a failure by any stretch, but with everything lined up perfectly for it, it's strange that it's still nowhere near dominating like it used to. Alright, let's stop dancing around the topic and get into why I think things are this way. The first reason, today's World of Warcraft just doesn't feel like an MMO anymore because the sense of progression is fucked up. Let's tackle the obvious, and honestly at this point a bit boring one first. The game is pay to win. Now, a paid store can work for a free-to-play MMO, but WoW is pay-to-play with a subscription model, paid expansions, cosmetic purchases, and paid character progression too on top of everything. You can buy a level 70 boost, and if the last expansion taught us anything, a max level boost with good gear will probably pop up eventually a bit later, letting you jump right into high-end content. Then there's the WoW token, which lets you buy gold with real money to pay for leveling boosts or runs through dungeons and raids. According to my calculations, which are probably not very correct, you need to spend around $1,700 to go from not even owning the game to having nearly top-tier gear without ever really playing. And as crazy as that sounds, it's actually cheaper than some other notoriously pay-to-win dumpster fire cash grabbing MMOs, where at least you still have to play to leverage those advantages you get by paying. But in WoW, you can simply pay for power straight up. And as if that wasn't enough, WoW also soft resets your progress every few months and hard resets it every year and a half or so. So, whether you're a big player or a big payer, all your effort goes out the window pretty quickly once a new patch drops. No matter what, you'll be surpassed by someone who barely plays once the new patch rolls around if you don't play for a week or something like that. These two issues, pay to win and frequent progress resets, are what keep World of Warcraft from truly being a great MMO again. Sure, there's a lot to appreciate on the surface, but underneath that polished exterior, the progression system, a core part of the MMO experience, feels broken. It's very hard to find a pay-to-win MMO that also pisses on the people who invest money into it. WoW remains a truly special experience. If you really want to understand just how messed up World of Warcraft is, let me give you some examples of notoriously bad pay-to-win MMOs I've played over the years that are actually better in this regard. In these games, even if you pay for advantages, you still have to actually play to make use of them. You often end up paying even more to reach the end game, so it's not so easy for people to do it all the way and, unlike WoW, they don't reset your progress every few months. Think about prestigious games like 4-Story, Meat and 2, Cabal Online, Fiesta Online, Neverwinter, Skyforge, Perfect World, and Adventure Quest Worlds. There are plenty more of these cash-grab MMOs that are universally known for pay-to-win mechanics, yet they're better than WoW in this respect. It's so insane, it's almost unbelievable. I'll close this first part of the video on a positive note. These issues, as bad as they are, could theoretically be fixed. If Blizzard removed character boosts and WoW tokens and made past progress more meaningful, we could see WoW head in a better direction. I know it's not going to happen, but maybe there is hope for the next big World of Warcraft game, whenever and if that ever comes out. Secondly, let's talk about the new player experience. If you've been around WoW for a few years or longer, you probably don't realize just how painfully bad it is for newcomers. You really need to watch a friend try to figure out the game for the first time to understand how confusing and bloated it's become. But why does this matter to me? Simple. I have no friends playing the game, and that sucks. Even if you don't play with them constantly, it's great to have someone to chat with, help out, or compare progress. And it's not like my friends didn't try. They did. But going from level 1 to dealing with the endgame gearing system is just way too unintuitive for a new player. The story. It's impossible to follow. Even if someone guides you to stick with one expansion using Chromie time, it's still a mess. You encounter characters you don't know, lore that's never explained, and events that just don't make sense. And that's with someone trying to steer you through it all without bouncing between expansions. My best friend started playing during the War Within while I was too busy to join him at first. By the time he hit level 30-something, he'd dabbled in parts of the main quests for BFA, Shadowlands, and Dragonflight, all while leveling in Wrath of the Lich King Chromie time. By the time he hit level 70, he'd played through the main storylines of 4 expansions and understood absolutely nothing. He didn't care about the story because it felt disconnected and confusing. And honestly, who could blame him? The story in The War Within was better, but it still had moments that didn't make sense because the game doesn't properly explain what led up to this point. And by then, he just didn't care anymore. Can you blame him? Even if he wanted to, parts of the story are time-gated, which makes even less sense for someone trying to get invested. Now, you might be thinking, not everyone plays for the story. Fair point. But even beyond that, the game's a nightmare. Dungeon Finder doesn't teach you anything because, by the time you've even loaded in, everyone else is already steamrolling through. You just try to keep up. Then, you're tossed into Mythic Plus without understanding anything. Your key gets depleted because the tank leaves after the first wipe, and you're left clueless. You try to join a raid group only to be asked to link an achievement proving you've already cleared the content, and without it, no invite. The gearing system? Complicated beyond belief with multiple currencies, conversions, and different sources. The crafting system? It made no sense to him, and honestly, I'm right there with him. I never bothered to dive deep enough to figure it out either. After 2 weeks of trying solo, my friend decided the game just wasn't for him, just like the other friends who tried before him. It's wild to think how many players, including major content creators, have brought this up over and over, but Blizzard still hasn't addressed it seriously. It's no fun having to read a ton of guides and install a bunch of add-ons just to understand and play the game, but everything is so bloated that there is no other way, especially for a new player. Third point is going to feel a bit more abstract at the start, but hear me out. Retail WoW just does feel too much like a game. I know that sounds obvious, it is a game, but it's loaded with immersion-breaking moments that constantly remind you of it. It feels designed by a dev team that wanted to check every gamey box. Quests, points, rewards, pop-ups, the whole Ubisoft-style setup. You know the type: endless map markers, a ton of collectibles, pop-ups every 2 seconds, immersion-breaking cosmetics and more. Logging in, I feel like I've got a to-do list instead of an open world to be a part of. World quests, weekly goals, the Great Vault with tasks laid out that I need to grind through a set number of times. Dungeons and raids are accessed through the game's own group finder interface, every activity handing me points and currencies to unlock new cosmetics or gear upgrades. Add-ons are practically mandatory if I want to compete in endgame, covering half my screen, and then there's the time gating. Main story locked off just because the devs decided it should be, with no in-game logic behind it. Even the quests are conveniently packed together, letting you complete several objectives at once in one spot every single time. And the NPCs calling me a champion or right off the bat before I've even done anything. It's all just so obviously engineered and planned out. Everything is so clearly designed to pull you in and keep you playing, always offering efficient paths no matter what you're doing. Sure, not having everything perfectly efficient or rewarding at every step might feel worse in the short term, but it really pays off in the long run. The cosmetics in the game often feel out of place in the Warcraft universe, like they were pulled from a completely different game. Usually something Disney-inspired, of course, which only pulls me further out of the world. When I think about Classic WoW, it's a totally different experience. Classic is more like Elden Ring. You're dropped into a world where you have to figure things out for yourself, grind from the ground up, and no one holds your hand. Retail, on the other hand, feels more like a modern Assassin's Creed game with constant tutorials, waypoints, rewards, and annoying pop-ups. Sure, maybe Classic leans a bit too far the other way. I get it, I use Questy too. But Classic feels like a world that exists on its own terms that was not obviously made for you, not a theme park where every step is pre-planned for instant rewards. Retail WoW just shows you the gears of the machine at every turn, and honestly, it kills the magic. That said, some players actually like this gamified version. It doesn't bother them as much. But for someone like me, who values immersion, it's a big problem, especially in a game I once loved for that very reason. My fourth point is the story itself. Sure, the story in The War Within is better than Dragonflight and Shadowlands, but that's not saying much. Maybe I'm burned out from how bad the story was over the past 2 expansions, but this one still doesn't hook me. There's nothing standout about the main storyline. The thing with Khadgar at the beginning was probably the biggest wow moment, and even then, who actually thought he was dead? It's not as Disney-like as Dragonflight anymore, but it still doesn't feel like Warcraft. Imagine using some iconic Warcraft music in the current game like this, or this, or even this. Or this. Or even something like this. It just wouldn't fit. And that's fine. As I said, Blizzard can create whatever story they want for who they want. But what drew me into this universe were games like Warcraft 2, Warcraft 3, Vanilla WoW, and the original novels. Yes, The War Within is an improvement, but it's still far from what I want from this game, far from what made me fall in love with the universe. Even as a story on its own, separate from the Warcraft label, it feels mediocre. And as Preach pointed out, time gating the story only makes it worse. Chris Metzen said his influence will be more noticeable in future expansions since The War Within was largely written before he returned. So, maybe there's still a glimmer of hope for me when it comes to WoW's story, but it's hard to say how much. I love the stories Metzen created back in the day for the most part, but even with him at the helm, the rest of the team's direction might be too different now to recapture that classic Warcraft feel. He's just one person, and no matter how great a leader, it's the team's collective vision that will matter most. It's been so long since the story truly captivated me, probably since Legion. BFA was still decent, but Shadowlands was released 4 years ago, and each patch since then made me care less and less. By the end of Dragonflight, I was checked out completely. The story in The War Within is okay, but I need more than just okay to get invested again. And to make me care while moving away from that OG Warcraft feel, the story would have to be amazing on its own. Maybe that's just me though, who knows? One of the key aspects I love in older online games, which has almost gone in retail WoW, is the sense of community interaction. Whether it's simple player interactions or larger community-driven moments like events or streamers joining in, those games used to have a real sense of shared experience. In retail, I can play for hours, whether I'm leveling, farming old content, doing Mythic Plus, raids or delves, without exchanging a single word with anyone. And don't get me wrong, if I had to choose between an MMO that constantly requires me to talk to others and one that doesn't, I'd actually go with the one that doesn't. But it's not because I dislike interacting. I just want it to happen naturally and on my own terms. In retail WoW though, this only happens in some of the guilds at most. Even if I'm not the one chatting, it's nice to see others active in guild chat or other global chats. You can never forget those memorable conversations from the Baron's local chat. The current game feels so sanitized that there's almost no interaction. God forbid you actually need to interact with someone in this MMO for any reason. The closest you get is asking if someone needs a drop at the end of a Mythic Plus run. It's gotten so bad that there are actually some unintended benefits. Back in the day, if someone left a Mythic Plus group, usually everyone would follow and leave too, but not before at least one person called someone else fucking retarded. Now, it's like no one even cares enough for that. We wipe once or twice, someone quietly leaves, and that's it. No drama, just silence. A few weeks ago, I was tanking Scarlet Monastery on my warrior in hardcore WoW. When Herod dropped shoulders, a paladin agreed to pass on them and on the loot from Cathedral if I promised to invite him in my groups for future runs. I agreed. Now we do dungeons together daily, and we're both close to hitting 60. I know he's a solid paladin, and he knows I'm a reliable warrior. He's a blacksmith with maxed first aid, but no cooking skills. I'm an alchemist with maxed cooking, but skipped first aid. So, we help each other out. I provide him with potions and food, and he gives me bandages and blacksmithing items. It's just one example, but it's the kind of interaction that's common in Classic and almost non-existent in retail, where people just don't talk. Retail WoW is also missing community events, which might not be a huge negative, but it's a missed positive. The entire hardcore community in Classic WoW grew from this kind of community interaction, with things like the Macgora tournament and the Only Fangs Guild bringing people together. I remember my first time playing Classic back in 2020. I reached Orgrimmar on my undead priest and found a crowd of players running in circles, spamming abilities. Some random guy invited me to join the group. It turned out a Twitch streamer was hosting a party IRL and was using this in-game rave scene from Orgrimmar as a projection at his party. Random, but so cool. Moments like these aren't necessary for me to enjoy a game, but they definitely add something special. Retail has nothing like this. I can't speak for every modern MMO, but I've only seen this kind of organic community interaction in older games like classic WoW and old-school RuneScape. The last thing I want to touch on is gold making. I saved it for last because, honestly, I know it's a niche topic. Not everyone cares about it like I do. But hear me out. The first MMO I ever played wasn't World of Warcraft because, well, my parents wouldn't pay for a subscription just so I could play a game. So, my first MMO had a strong focus on making gold. In that game, gold was basically everything. It was how you progressed, how you geared up, how you gained almost all the progress on your character. Dropping an item you could just equip to get stronger happened very rarely. You had to grind for gold, buy your equipment, and upgrade it. I played that MMO for years, so maybe that's where my preference for gold making comes from. In retail WoW though, it feels like gold making as a progression path is almost impossible, or at least feels very bad. That's a real shame. It takes away a whole way to play the game for people who actually enjoy that grind. I'm not saying it should be the best way to progress, but it should be a way. It's fun to fund your own gear through the gold you farm. I also really like GDKPs. GDKPs aren't just about gold meaning something for progression. They're also a great symbiotic way for skilled players to earn and spend gold as part of their advancement. It's immersive and it creates a bit of player friction, which adds to the game's social experience. But you might argue, well, you can buy gear with gold, or even that GDKPs are bad for the game. And you're right on both counts. Yes, you can buy some gear with gold, but the amount needed for those pieces is ridiculous for most players to actually enjoy. Especially when you consider that you could just pay a few bucks for a WoW token and skip all of that grind anyway. As I mentioned before, the WoW token has a lot of issues, which only adds to the frustration. And even if gold making was a bit more rewarding, there still aren't many good bind-on-equip items on the auction house to buy anyway. As for the problem with GDKPs, yes, right now, they would be bad for the game, mainly because of the WoW token again. It's just another way for people to buy their gear with real-life money. Combine that with the botting and other shady methods to buy gold, and it's no wonder GDKPs have a bad reputation. It's a shame because, once again, it feels like Blizzard dropped the ball. This could have been an awesome way to keep gold relevant in WoW, but they screwed this too. Once again, I'm sorry to bring up Classic, but it really was a different story back then. Now, I'll admit, even in Classic, gold making doesn't go as far as I'd personally like. I'd still love to be able to progress my character a bit more through gold alone by buying better gear, but I get that objectively, that might not be the best approach. That said, the range of things you can do with gold to improve your character in Classic is way broader. Yes, part of that is because consumables for raiding are both pricey and essential. But beyond that, there's also a lot of powerful gear on the auction house. By focusing on gold making as your main gearing strategy at level 60, you can put together a pretty decent set, with some of the pieces being really good. And that's not even factoring in the top enchants, which can really burn through your gold. So while it's not the best method for gearing up, raiding is still king for that, it does allow you to get your character to a solid power level, even to the point where you could secure a good spot in a raiding guild because of your gear. And if it weren't for the constant botting, GDKPs would be an excellent way to make gold-driven progression viable all the way to best-in-slot gear. Considering that WoW tokens aren't on Classic era realms, GDKPs could actually work perfectly there. As I've mentioned, gold making wouldn't be the top or only way to progress. It'd just be another way. Also, let me clear this up. gold making is far from boring or easy. Sure, you could roam around collecting crafting materials and selling them, but that's not even close to the best method. Being a strong gold maker means knowing your server's market inside and out, predicting what will sell, what won't, and where prices are heading, and that in classic WoW will often mean you need to understand all aspects of the game. For those who've already built up a little gold cushion and market knowledge, reselling is also a great strategy. So, this was the video. At the end of the day, retail WoW isn't a bad game. There are still plenty of people who enjoy it every day. I even have fun with it for a few days whenever a new expansion drops. But I'd be lying if I said I think I'll ever really be invested in it again, or that this is the best the game could be. This isn't meant to bash retail WoW, or at least it doesn't feel that way from my side. I want the game to be amazing. I know I compared it to Classic a lot, but that's just natural. I don't want retail to become like Classic. Classic WoW is my favorite MMO and has been for years. But I'm aware of its limitations, and honestly, if I had to point to where the biggest potential is for the Warcraft IP, I'd say it lies overwhelmingly in a future World of Warcraft game rather than in Classic. If WoW 2 ever happens, it could blow both retail and Classic out of the water and be the greatest MMO ever made. But for the current game, I think the ship sailed a while back. It can improve, sure, but there's just too much bloated, broken stuff in there now to fix everything. And as bleak as it sounds, I don't think retail could ever compete with Classic as an MMO. Honestly, I'm not sure it could stand up as an MMO in general. If a new MMO had launched in, say, 2018 or even today in 2024, doing what WoW is doing now without the support of Classic and its long-standing history, I think that game would already be dead. Retail alone probably wouldn't have survived BFA and Shadowlands without Classic backing it up. And while Dragonflight and the War Within expansion are decent, I don't think they'd be nearly enough to make it #1 again without all of this extra backup. Even when WoW launches an expansion with huge resources and perfect timing, it just doesn't hit like it used to. The numbers show it. Right now I have basically zero hope for retail, but I do hold out hope for a future WoW game. I do think it'll happen, though who knows when. If I had to guess, I wouldn't expect a release before 2030. Besides just being something I enjoy doing, I hope that making this video brings some attention to the issues and the wasted potential I see in the game. My biggest worry, and I know this might come off harsher than I intend, is that the same team leading current development will be the ones handling any future game, if we ever get one. I think they need really fresh ideas alongside what made WoW great in the first place. And if the repetitive nature of the last 5 expansion is telling us something, is that the current team is either not able or not willing to change things up. There's a lot more to say about where WoW could go in the future, but I'll save that for another video. Anyway, thanks so much for watching all the way through. Really appreciate it. See you in the next one.